Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 8 of the show. Major news on the program today. We're going to be starting off with Edward Snowden being formally charged with espionage and the Obama administration's move to get him extradited from Hong Kong. We have huge stories today. We've got details on how the George Zimmerman trial is going to play out. We've got conservatives proving that they hate not only gay people, but the U.S. Constitution as well. We've got Paula Deen's statements on race, and I'm not referring to the ones that were revealed this week. Some very questionable comments from back in 2012. And we also have an update, the winner of the world's ugliest dog contest, which we'll reveal probably in the very end of the program. But we are going to be starting off with the major news of the day. Edward Snowden has been formally charged with espionage, and the Obama administration, as expected, is now formally moving to have him extradited from Hong Kong, where he's currently evading our government. So first, the details on what he's actually being charged with. The United States charged Snowden with theft of government property, unauthorized communication of national defense information, and willful communication of classified communications intelligence to an unauthorized person. And they are also saying that they now want Hong Kong to send him back to the United States for him to be tried for these charges. So we've got statements from both a senior Obama administration official who's speaking on condition of anonymity, and also Tom Donilon, U.S. National Security Advisor. So first, the anonymous source says, "If Hong Kong doesn't act soon, it will complicate our bilateral relations and raise questions about Hong Kong's commitment to the rule of law." As I said, the U.S. National Security Advisor says, "Hong Kong has been a historically good partner of the United States in law enforcement matters, and we expect them to comply with the treaty in this case." Now, I suppose for those of you who have been following Edward Snowden from day one, this is not really going to come as a shock to us. We expected that at some point he would be tried. The exact nature of the charges, I don't know if any of us would have known at that point what they could have possibly been, but they're here. And we had been expecting this entire time that at some point the U.S. government is going to try to get Edward Snowden from Hong Kong back stateside. And so that's now happening. So this is all happening Saturday. The Obama administration is talking about this. Now, Obama himself is not currently talking about it. He's got climate change on his mind. The big climate change speech is coming up. But I am going to make a prediction. I do think that eventually Hong Kong will extradite Edward Snowden to the U.S. government. As these government sources said, Hong Kong does have a pretty close relationship with the U.S. government. They have been amenable to helping us out when we've needed it in the past. So I think that in this case, they probably will do that. I don't think that they have much vested interest in protecting Edward Snowden. I think that perhaps if there were no cost to it, they'd let him stay there. But at this point, I think that the U.S. government is ready to place significant pressure on Hong Kong to get Edward Snowden. And so I think that he will be extradited here. He will be tried. Now, exactly what will happen to him? If recent history is any indication, it's probably not going to be very good for him. Now, what I think could possibly influence what happens is public opinion. That's what I've been saying since day one. How people respond to this entire NSA data mining and wiretapping scandal, whether or not they support Edward Snowden and make it clear in surveys that they do, I think that will actually affect the U.S. government's actions. Now, unfortunately for Edward Snowden and for those of us who want the NSA programs to be shut down, the average American up until this point hasn't really seemed to care. And when polled, if they know what's going on at all and if they even have an opinion, it tends to be that they like these programs. And we've seen that more people approve of them than disapprove of them. Now, this was also the case about 8 years ago when similar policies were being talked about, but the number has actually grown over time. And there seems to be support for these policies on both sides of the aisle. Both in terms of the politicians, but also in terms of the average Americans. And that is unfortunate. Now, I'm going to say one additional thing, and this may be controversial. While I do not believe that Edward Snowden is in any way a traitor, and I believe that being willing to reveal this information of what we know of him so far, I'll just say that in case he reveals something that actually does hurt America in the future, I do think that he's a hero. Now, that does not mean that I don't think he should be tried for what he did, and it does not mean that I don't think he should possibly go to jail for what he did. Being a hero and acting legally are not the same thing. In fact, if what you were doing was entirely legal and perhaps easy in some sense to do, it doesn't really make you a hero to do it. Now, I think he is a hero. I'm extremely glad that he revealed this information because it is at the very least starting a dialogue, but that does not mean that if he broke U.S. law, he should not be tried. I think that sometimes doing what's right means possibly paying the consequences. Now, I think that we should look into changing perhaps the consequences. I think that we should be more willing to have these very important whistleblowers reveal information about the government when it's acting in what seems to be an incredibly unconstitutional manner. But as it stands right now, they are charging him with these laws. We will see in the next couple of weeks, will Hong Kong buckle under U.S. pressure to extradite Edward Snowden? We don't know. At this time, though, I am going on record predicting that I think he will be sent back to the USA. Now, we have a related story. It's not exactly an expert opinion on what's going on, but it is the same subject, so we're going to transition into it. Fresh off of her rehiring by Fox News, Sarah Palin was on Eric Bolling's news program to discuss a number of issues: the IRS, Edward Snowden, trust in government, things like that. Now, bear with me, we have a number of different videos I want to talk about, but they're all interesting, they're all entertaining, and they all make me weep for the future of the U.S. media. So first, the revelation that over $70 million in bonuses will be going out to IRS employees in the near future. Let's hear Eric Bolling and Sarah Palin discuss.
We obviously can't trust the IRS. They proved that by targeting conservatives, and now the agency is giving their employees, their union employees, $70 million in bonuses paid for by the taxpayer.
I think only in an Orwellian government would collect a bad deed be so generously rewarded. It is a shame, and it's just more reason to distrust our federal government and the nonsense that's going on in Washington, D.C.
As expected, they got that wrong in about 7 different ways. Now, I only have time to cover 2 or 3, so I'll start with those. Now, first of all, the IRS targeting of conservative groups, that's already been debunked over the course of the last week. If you've been watching the Young Turks, you know it turned out that it was basically one conservative bureaucrat who, for whatever reason, possibly because he wanted to have oversight over these conservative groups, was gathering up these case files for himself. He was the one that caused it. It was not an Obama appointee. It was not an Obama directive that this happened. It turned out that it was, in fact, a conservative who was running it, and it was not malicious in any way. If anything, in the end, it could have led to some sort of preferential treatment. Now, in either case, I don't like that it was happening. I think that this guy should be looked into and possibly fired. But it was not an IRS-wide program. The fact that other people in the IRS are getting bonuses should not be taken into question because one guy happened to be doing something shady that we oppose. Now, they're using it to attack the IRS in total because they don't like the IRS. They understand that this was one guy. They know that at this point. So it's just ridiculous that they think, well, clearly none of them should ever have bonuses. In fact, they should have their pay cut because of this one guy being kind of a douchebag. They also say that this is a reason to distrust the government. Now, I distrust the government. I think that we have much better reasons than the IRS investigating these conservative outlets. And also, what I think is funny about this is that you have this one guy who is acting in a way that we don't approve of, possibly breaking the law, or definitely acting in a shady way. Totally true. And they think that that means that these bonuses should be taken away from every IRS employee. I wonder if Eric Bolling and Sarah Palin were making the same argument when there was malfeasance in the U.S. banks, when companies could shut down and CEOs would get $10, $20, $30 million golden parachutes. Were they also against bonuses in that case when there was malfeasance? I don't think so. I think that that's extremely unlikely. Now, another issue that they touched on before we get to the Edward Snowden was drones. We saw recently the FBI director said that there has been limited use of drones in the U.S. That's ominous from my point of view. Let's see if they can get this issue wrong, too.
Rand Paul was right when the senator engaged in the filibuster, and what he was asking for those couple of months ago, he was asking for these unanswered questions about domestic use of drones and the impact on the American public. What were they? What was going on, and was it actually happening?
Once again, they both get it wrong. Now, they are right to oppose the use of drones on U.S. soil or above U.S. soil. They're certainly right there. Now, first, and this is going to be a running theme throughout the rest of the clips of Sarah Palin, she's lying to you there. Now, look, she's saying she opposes the drones because Obama approves of the drones, at least in some sense, and so it makes sense for her to oppose them. I totally get that. But does anyone here believe that if she was the vice president at this point, they would not be using drones in the U.S.? Or that if at some point she runs for president and she becomes president, that they won't use drones in the future? That's ridiculous. There's going to be a couple of other cases in this video of her lying in that way, but whatever. The main way that she gets this wrong is actually when she talks about Rand Paul. So she said there that he stood up and he was against the use of drones. And if you recall, all of us here at the Young Turks were very much in Rand Paul's corner at that point, because it seemed like he was getting the issue right. Now, it took about 2 or 3 days before Rand Paul basically totally reversed course on drones when he said, well, I mean, if there was a guy in New York City and we found out that he had done something wrong, should we watch him? Well, yes, in that case, I suppose we should watch him. His convictions, his opposition to the program, just in the wind. Now, she's missing out on that point. Maybe she only saw the first video and then she was watching reality TV or something. But for those of you who were keeping track of what Rand Paul said about drones, his opposition to them did not hold strong over time. And so she's wrong there, and she gives him way too much credit that in the end he did not actually earn. Now, another issue going back to the IRS that they talked about was that this should be a reason that we abolish the IRS. Let's listen.
This week, the Tea Party suggested maybe it's time to abolish the IRS. What do you think of that idea?
Right on. Absolutely. In fact, this would give us reason to finally head towards simplification of a tax code and adopt a flat tax. And, you know, that way we could abolish the bureaucracy that is so burdensome and so expensive and really engaging in some ridiculous antics today in the IRS. And it would allow some sledgehammering of crony capitalism also, and some corruption within the tax cheats. And
how coincidental that because one guy engaged in targeting of conservative organizations, we should just get rid of the entire bureaucracy of the IRS. I'm sure there's no other hidden agenda that leads to them wanting to destroy it, except that they made it clear in what they were saying that there's a hidden agenda. They didn't say we should abolish the IRS so that we could replace it with something that's totally nonpartisan in some sense and doesn't act in an ideological fashion, when we've shown you historically that the IRS under both Democrats and Republicans has been incredibly political. No, they say that it's too expensive and it looks into people's taxes too much, and we should have, by golly, a flat tax, because that's what this issue is actually about. For them, it actually is, but it has nothing to do with the targeting of conservative groups or Tea Party groups. They want to abolish the IRS and possibly institute some sort of flat tax, not because they oppose bureaucracy, but because they oppose taxes. They want to reduce the tax burden on the most wealthy people in America. They want to line their pockets a little bit much and line the pockets of their wealthy donors when they're running for office, or the people who invest and run Fox News. Both of those people would love a lower tax burden, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the unions in the IRS. It has absolutely nothing to do with the targeting of Tea Party groups. It has everything to do with dollar bills. Now, finally, actually, this is not finally, but I do want to get to this. Listen to this little section. We have Sarah Palin, who's been hired to be a pundit to speak with expertise and knowledge and experience on political matters. Let's listen here. I
think this would give us great reason to make more sense of the coffers that are being filled by the American public's fruit of their labors.
Now, I'm going to be shallow for a little bit. I'm not even going to attack the actual substance of what she said, which was lacking, too. She had no idea what she was talking about there. It seemed to me as if she tuned herself out and just started spitting out, like, buzzwords, political buzzwords. I think that she, much like Kelly Kapoor in The Office, has decided that she gets by much easier if she just simply doesn't listen to what she says. And so that was ridiculous there. But let's move on, because this has been going on for quite a while. The last piece I want to talk about here is Edward Snowden, and she talks about that.
Snowden is not the problem. Here, we're told, oh, just, you know, relax. Don't worry about government spying on all of our communications, building that apparatus to be able to spy on all of us, that's no big deal. But it is criminal, the person who told us about what our government is doing. That's what's backwards about this. Snowden is not the problem. The problem is government violating our Fourth Amendment right, taking away our privacy.
On the actual substance, Sarah Palin has gotten it exactly right. Edward Snowden is not the problem. He's not a problem. Yes, I do think that if he broke some laws, he should suffer the consequences, although we might want to consider changing those laws to encourage whistleblowing in the future. But he is not the problem. The problem is government intrusion into our internet, into our phone calls, and various things like that. But the problem here is that while she got the actual substance there right, she is lying to your face. She, like, again, going back to the drones, does anyone believe that if Sarah Palin was in control of government, she would not engage in this sort of surveillance? Or that she would have so much, gee golly, respect for the average American that she wouldn't allow this to go on? No, if anybody would love to exercise strong executive power, it's obviously conservatives like Sarah Palin. So that's ridiculous. So she gets most of it wrong as a pundit, and when she gets it right, she's lying to you. And if she were ever to make it into politics, it's not would, but I'll knock on it anyway, she would instantly reverse course. And so this is our first major taste of what Sarah Palin rejoining Fox News is going to be like. In one sense, I guess it's nothing but fun, but in terms of a reasoned debate, an educated public, and rational policies in the future, it is nothing but a disaster in the making. Let's move on. Another disaster in the making, possibly. Did a nice little transition there. Let's talk about George Zimmerman. Over the course of the last week, we've got new information on how the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case is going to proceed. Now, you already know at this point from a few days ago that the jury is going to be comprised entirely of females, which is interesting. I'll speculate a bit about that later on in the video. But we have some additional information as well. The most important news about the Trayvon Martin case is that they are not going to allow the audio files to be played for the jury. Let me quote the news here from the New York Times. In an order released on Saturday, the judge in the case, Deborah S. Nelson, excluded the testimony. She said the science supporting the experts' analyses is not as widely accepted at this time as the more established methods relied on by defense witnesses who said it was impossible to conclude whose voice it was. Under the law, experts' opinions based on technology or a scientific technique can be admitted as evidence only if that technique is generally accepted in their field. The defense lawyers successfully argued that evidence from the prosecution's audio experts did not meet that standard. Now, do you think that it was scientific rigor that caused them to want to deny this as evidence? No, it maybe had something to do with the fact that one of the experts in this case said that it was definitely not Zimmerman who was yelling for help, begging for his life on the tape, and the other said that it's almost surely Trayvon Martin. So in both of those cases, it would severely hurt George Zimmerman if those tapes got out. Now, they will not be played. I think that that's an extreme injustice. Now, look, I'm not an expert on the analyses of these audio files, but I think that if there's no experts saying that they're in question, and the experts who actually looked into them say that it's clear that it was Trayvon Martin, that would seem to be relevant to the case, since he is at one point begging for his life. Which sort of makes sense considering he's the guy who did not go prowling around the neighborhood looking for trouble, and he didn't have a gun. But they're not going to be able to use that. In addition, a bit of a mixed bag here on the other sorts of things that will be allowed and will not be allowed. In another ruling issued Friday, Judge Nelson turned down the defense's request that the state not use the terms wannabe cop and vigilante in opening statements. I think that makes sense. He is a textbook vigilante. He was wandering around looking for crime, packing heat. Seems like a wannabe cop, since he did try to become a cop and was rejected. He's literally a wannabe cop, and he's also exactly a vigilante, except not cool like Batman or anything like that. She also said that the state could say profiling, but not racial profiling. And now that obviously is very much in George Zimmerman's, to his advantage there. Now, it's clear when he was both talking to the police on the tape and what experts have said about his previous the people that he had identified and said were trouble, they all tended, coincidentally, to be black males. So clearly he was actually engaging in racial profiling, not just profiling. I guess it's a compromise in some way. But it's interesting, isn't it, how these trials play out. That you have the gun owners on the jury, which I suppose with the amount of the population that owns guns, I guess demographically that's just going to happen. The fact that they're all women, I don't know if that's going to help Zimmerman, if it's going to hurt Zimmerman. There's conspiracy theories on both sides about that. I don't personally have a strong opinion. But I love the language. You can use this term, you can't use this term. You can say profiling, but not racial profiling. You can't say he shot Trayvon Martin. You can only say that he added ventilation to Trayvon Martin's chest. You can talk about the Skittles, but you have to refer to them as fruit-flavored shrapnel. All sorts of issues like that. It's ridiculous that it seems so clear what happened here. Now, look, perhaps in some crazy sense, George Zimmerman did feel at some point during the actual physical altercation that his life was in jeopardy. Let's play devil's advocate and say that that's true. What bothers me so much about the people that have come out defending George Zimmerman is that there is no doubt whatsoever that a grave injustice has happened, that an innocent died who did not need to die, that the world would be better off if George Zimmerman had simply not gone out of his house at that point. if he had not accosted, if he had not chased, if he had not tracked down and eventually shot Trayvon Martin. I don't think any rational person can doubt that the world would be better off in that case, since Trayvon Martin was doing nothing wrong. I believe it was George Zimmerman's brother, possibly his father, who was not even willing to say that, who would not say that the world would be better off if he'd stayed home. I think that that's ridiculous. Now look, there's going to be more rulings like this before the trial is done about what can and cannot be admissible as evidence. And we don't know at this point what's going to happen. Is George Zimmerman actually going to end up in jail for what he did? We don't know. We will continue to cover it. But I hope for Trayvon Martin's family that there is at least some justice in this. Now, let's step out, look at national news, important news that's going to shape the future of immigration policy in America. There's been a breakthrough on the immigration reform bill. That's good, I suppose, since we have to have some action on immigration reform. Now, I don't like the bill at all, and I feel like the people who talk about a breakthrough and want to act like this is an amazing thing are to some extent at least lying to you. But the part about this immigration reform bill and the breakthrough that I want to focus on is the border security. And so that's the big breakthrough, that they're going to be sending what sounds like about 40,000 additional border guards, which Cenk Uygur has estimated is one person for every 500 yards. So you can possibly yell to each other if you get bored while watching the border. They're also going to be building at least 700 miles of additional border fence, and that's the part we're going to focus on in this video. So as you might guess, building a 700-mile-long fence is an expensive proposition. And so yes, this is going to cost an extreme amount of money to up the border security. So let's talk about some of the previous efforts to build fences on the border. So for pedestrian fences, the price was averaged per mile between $400,000 and $15 million per mile, with an average of $3.9 million per mile, which is a crazy amount of money for what basically amounts to just one layer of fence to stop people from crossing. The vehicle fencing is a little bit cheaper for whatever reason, between $200,000 and $1.8 million per mile, for an average of $1 million per mile. So very expensive, these previous pedestrian and vehicle fences. Now understand that the fence that they're talking about building here is not the pedestrian fence, and it's not the vehicle fence. It's not a one-layer security system. It's going to be, at the very least, 2 layers of fencing with territory bought between them that will be patrolled by these border agents. So it's going to be extremely expensive to build, far more than these other fences, which were already crazy expensive. And understand that the construction of the fence is not the only expense. They also have to build the land. Now, how much does that cost? Well, we have a few ideas. They've previously had to purchase private property or at least get the rights to build the fences on them. So we have 2 cases here. The Nature Conservancy in South Texas was offered $114,000 to build a fence on their land. They eventually settled for $1 million. A developer in Brownsville, Texas, I have friends who live there, offered $233,000, ended up with $4.7 million. And that is with much shorter segments of fence that have already been built. How much is it going to cost to purchase the land, to build the fence, to patrol the fence for God knows how many years, if not decades? The cost boggles the mind. And understand that the people that are pushing for this, yes, there are some Democrats, but for the most part they're conservatives who, on every other day of the year, are very much worried about the national debt and the deficit and fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility. But when it comes to keeping out brown people, the sky is the limit on how much they're going to pay. And if they could build the fence up to the sky, they would pay to build it that high. Now let's talk more generally about why it is that when talking about immigration reform, the thing that everybody seems to agree that we should have is more border agents and a bigger, more expensive, and more durable fence, possibly with drones all over it. Although, again, these are the people that are supposedly against drones being used for domestic surveillance. The reason that the drone is so popular and the reason that sending people to the border is so popular is because of old-fashioned xenophobia. It's the gift that keeps on giving. You tell the people, we've got these invaders that are illegally coming across the border, they're jumping over the fences we already have, and the idea that perpetuates from that is that these immigrants are criminals, that they're dangerous, that they might be terrorists, you can't trust them. So you get people on the border scared of what's going on. You tell people who don't live near the border what's going on there, and it leads to long-term xenophobia and distrust, if not hatred, of people coming from Central America, South America, and particularly Mexico. In addition, it leads people to worry more about outsiders in general. And that's something that America has had a strong history of, is worry about foreigners. We're an incredibly xenophobic country. Now, there are some others. In Europe, for instance, Spain to some extent has some xenophobia for people coming across from Morocco. Some areas of Eastern Europe are incredibly worried about Turkish immigration and things like that. And so this sort of immigration-based xenophobia is, I think, extremely scary, and I don't like seeing it played out here. Now, over 10 years ago, as an undergrad, I remember reading textbooks about how it's always politically popular to want to allocate more money to border security, but it's ultimately a futile effort. And yet, 10 years later, we're still doing it, and we're still spending God knows how many millions or billions of dollars on it. And the reason is, when you build the fence a little bit higher, or you increase the security, it does not stop the demand for access to the United States. It will only drive up the cost of paying the coyotes or paying whatever it is to get across the border. You put more people on the border, they just figure out a time that those borders aren't being watched. You put a fence there, they figure out how to jump over it, or they tunnel underneath it. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to end up with this immigration bill because, of course, the Senate does need to consider it as well. But at this point, it's extremely worrisome. If anything passes, it seems like the only way it's going to pass is if the pathway to citizenship is insanely long and complicated to tread down, and we spend untold amounts of money on border security. Neither of those things should be the case. We should have a much more common sense path to citizenship and an understanding that if you want to stop people from coming across the border illegally, you only need to prosecute employers who give them jobs and thus incentive to come across the borders. It's not about putting walls up. It's not about putting walls around a prison. It's not about walling off access from wild animals and things like that. And it's no reason to encourage xenophobia. Sorry, that gets me a little bit worked up. I don't like the treating humans as animals. I don't. They remember anybody remember back in the days of Coneheads when they had the necklaces that would set people on fire? I get a little bit of that sense from the modern day Republican Party. But speaking of the modern day Republican Party, let's turn to one of its leaders. Mitch McConnell has made very clear that if Harry Reid, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, engages in the use of the nuclear option on judicial nominations, he can expect a very harsh future once the Republicans take control. Now, before we get to the quotes from Mitch McConnell, let's just point out that the only reason Harry Reid, who is by no means a brave man when it comes to the use of efforts like the nuclear option, which I don't even like the title of, but whatever, is because the judicial nominations and non-judicial nominations of the Obama administration are being held up at historic lengths. We have major vacancies that need to be filled, people waiting to be nominated for months, if not years. This is historically crazy when it comes to the judicial nominating process. And so that's what has brought Harry Reid, a man who's like a stone when it comes to wanting to move on things like this. That's the only thing leading to him possibly considering doing it in the future. And so Mitch McConnell feels the need to ward that off. And so here's what he says. He says, there's not a doubt in my mind that if the majority breaks the rules of the Senate to change the rules of the Senate with regard to nominations, the next majority, they're talking about a possible Republican majority, will do it for everything. I wouldn't be able to argue a year and a half from now, if I were the majority leader, to my colleagues that we shouldn't enact our legislative agenda, with a simple 51 votes, having seen what the previous majority just did. I mean, there would be no rational basis for that. From the country's point of view, it's a huge step in the wrong direction. Now look, I don't want us to have to strike down the filibuster, whether on judicial nominations or on everything, as Mitch McConnell is threatening to do. We would not need to if there was any sort of understanding of the history of the Senate among those in the Senate right now. Now, many of you might have seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, when a filibuster meant you stood up and you talked for a long time, hours, if not days, the media could cover it, and there might be a political cost to bear for having done so, for stopping the action of the Senate. That's no longer the case. If you know how the filibuster happens now, you don't need to actually stand. There's no cost to doing it, and that's why it's simply exploded exponentially in its use. If you look at the number of filibusters per year, the only thing on a chart that rises as high as that is the parts per million of carbon, thanks to our efforts, our lack of efforts against global warming. And so something does need to be done. But what Mitch McConnell is talking about is not that something. We need to eventually nominate and confirm judicial nominations and non-judicial nominations. And even if the nuclear option in this case was used to finally get some action in that front, the idea that that necessarily means that you have to use it for everything is ridiculous. Now, What's interesting here is that Mitch McConnell probably, in any event, would do this because the Senate is getting a little bit crazier every single year. I'm actually surprised that the last time the Republicans were in control, not that many years ago, they didn't do this. But they showed at least a little bit of restraint under Bush. I guess they should get some props for that. Now, will they do it in the future? I think that that's an open question. I think that there is reason to believe it. Now, the Republican Senate is not as crazy as the Republican House. They would do it in a second. But the Senate might well do it as well. Now, one reason why I think Mitch McConnell is ready to do whatever he can the next time they get in control of the Senate is because of what they're doing or not doing on immigration reform. It might well be the last time they do it. Now, I'm not one of those apocalyptic speakers who say that if immigration reform passes or we have a pathway to citizenship, the Republican Party will cease to exist. But I do think that it will be difficult for them in the future, especially in the near future. They're extremely xenophobic. They're not very good at hiding it anymore. We actually have a story about that coming up later in the show. And so I think that it could hurt them. Now, I don't want the nuclear option to be used. I hope that it's not necessary. I hope that the Republicans will back off and actually give a fair up and down vote to some of these judicial and non-judicial nominees. At this point, we don't know if that's going to happen, though. And if nothing else, the possibility that in the future the Senate business could be voted up or down to 51, just a simple majority vote, that is interesting as a pundit, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I'm going to take a quick break here because my throat is killing me. I'm losing my voice. We'll be back in just a minute. Back on the second half of the show, a number of great stories. We got one or two more serious ones, and then we will eventually get into some ridiculous fun stories. But we're going to be starting off with marriage equality, always a hot topic in America over the last decade or so. A group of more than 200 conservative activists have made clear that gay marriage, marital equality, is a line that they cannot and will not cross, and they have vowed that they will not stand for the Supreme Court making gay marriage legal. They've also vowed, by the way, that they're going to ignore any ruling. What does that mean? We're going to speculate in a little bit, but let's give them a chance to make their case. We're going to read their statement for you. Now, this is coming from Liberty Council Action Chairman Matt Staver and Common Good Alliance Chairman Deacon Keith Fournier. They say, as the Supreme Court acknowledged in the 1992 decision of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, its power rests solely upon the legitimacy of its decisions in the eyes of the people. If the Supreme Court were to issue a decision that redefined marriage or provided a precedent on which to build an argument to redefine marriage, the Supreme Court will thereby undermine its legitimacy. It will be acting beyond its proper constitutional role and contrary to the natural moral law, which transcends religions, culture, and time, and space, and elves, or whatever. So I love this because I don't like the term butthurt, but I don't think a group of activists has ever been as butthurt as this. Now look, is the Supreme Court going to enshrine in the U.S. Constitution some implied idea of marital equality? I personally think with the rulings coming out of the Supreme Court, that's unlikely. Now they've made a few moves that have been seemingly reasonable. For instance, not being able to patent human genes. That's cool. And things like that. And yes, John Roberts has, in a couple of cases, not acted like an insane person. And so that gives me some hope. But I don't think that it's likely that they're going to say, yes, tomorrow gays can get married. I think that that's unlikely. But I love that they're so pissed off about this. They're so worried, just shaking in their boots. Oh my God, Adam and Steve are going to be able to get married, and so we have to organize. And let's get to the heart of the matter. They say that they're going to ignore any ruling. What the hell is that even supposed to mean? They can go and get married, has nothing to do with you. Now that's the argument we've been making to hopefully give them the idea that they don't have to worry about it because it doesn't influence their life, it doesn't affect their life in any way. But when it comes to ignoring the ruling, what does that mean? They're not going to attend the wedding? They're not going to bring presents? I swear, if the bouquet comes to me, I'm just going to let it fall at my feet. I don't even care. I'm ignoring it. It's ridiculous. It doesn't take your acceptance. It doesn't have anything to do with you. And so I assume that they mean they're more likely that they'll protest the marriages or they'll try to get laws passed in states around the country. If that's what they mean, and that's the only rational thing that could be coming out of them from their point of view, that's what they're already doing, and that kind of makes it an empty threat. Now, we have had movement recently. A couple more states have legalized gay marriage. Now, it's coming in a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's a ballot measure. Sometimes it's state judiciaries. Sometimes it's a bill passed by the legislature. Now, look, of those ways, I don't want it to be the judiciary. I don't even really want it to be politicians. I want the average person in every state to say, I don't care what other people do with their love and sex lives. It doesn't affect me. I can marry whoever I want. I can date whoever I want. I can have sex with whoever I want. That is the only rational way to approach issues of marriage equality. There's just such a lack of empathy in American politics. And note that I did not say American politics today. I am not under the delusion that it was better in the past. I think that it was, in fact, probably worse in the past. But it continues, unfortunately, on this issue. So I will once again, as I do every time we cover an issue like this, I will give a couple of words of, I guess, relief to the conservative activists. If by some miracle the Supreme Court says gay marriage is legal, and they do that in the next few weeks or months, or maybe they don't, but DOMA is knocked down at some point in the future, and more states legalize gay marriage, and someday, some dystopic future, gay marriage is legal across the country, your life is not going to be changed a damn bit. You're still going to either like your marriage or not like your marriage. You're going to be able to find someone to date or not date. You're going to have a good sex life, maybe a bad sex life, in which case there's always Viagra and things like that. Your life is not going to be affected in the least. The only people whose lives are going to be affected, the people who can now enshrine their love in the law, get the benefits that our government gives to people who are married and things like that, have them not feel segregated from the rest of society, have gay and lesbian youths feel like they're actually a part of America. So you've got your life not affected at all, them feeling like equal citizens. You do the math. Let's do some other math. Okay, let's do some Chuck Hagel math. Hagel's about to be toasted. That's a joke we always make in the morning meetings. It gets lamer and lamer every time, and yet I still enjoy it. Chuck Hagel was doing a Q&A after a speech at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and then something extremely awkward happened. Let's watch.
Okay, so who has a way up in the back there? You're not a member of the Taliban, are you? Or, okay.
Mr. Secretary, I'm Robin Gandhi. I'm an assistant professor at UNO.
Chuck Hagel, what are you doing? Chuck Hagel is the defense secretary, as you know. He was obviously appointed by Obama. Now, he is a Republican, as you also might know. And so the possibility that he's harboring some sort of racism, not out of the question. I think I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here and just say it was an incredibly awkward joke. It's the sort of awkward joke that I very well might make in the future, and I hope that I get a little bit of slack when I do. But it's not a smart move to make. First of all, because the Taliban is not exactly a joking matter right now. Now, yes, they may be our new allies or whatever, but not exactly a joke. Maybe don't joke about it. Implying that a person at the Q&A is a member of a group that's at best bad isn't a great idea. And also, of course, there's the conflation of people from India, people from the Middle East, people from Africa. Who can tell the difference? They all look brown to us. That seems to be some people's point of view. And so Chuck Hagel, who in the past has come off as kind of a smart guy on some issues, this was unwise. Now, I'm not going to say that it was the most racist thing we've seen all week. Nobody likes when I do that, and I don't personally go through every week looking for examples of racism like some people do in the media, some liberals, some conservatives, actually. So I'm just going to say that it was unwise. Now, the Pentagon has released a statement apologizing for it. Let's give them a chance. They say, absolutely no slight toward any individual or the audience was intended. That's the last thing the Secretary would do under any circumstance in this or any other setting. He didn't know who would be called next to pose a question. That's not the best apology in the world because, yeah, he may not have known who was going to be called next, but he implied that he was a member of the Taliban. We all understand where his mind went. Let's just say, Chuck Hagel in this case, unwise humor decision. Maybe we can leave it at that. A little bit of racism that's going to be harder to sweep under the rug, though. Paula Deen has not been having a very good week since it became clear that she harbored, at best, sort of racist opinions on the use of the N-word and things like that. So now we've got video for you, and it is not of those statements. This is from 2012, and I believe that these things she said may actually be worse and more racist than what she was actually fired from the Food Network for. So we're going to watch these 3 videos and then do a little bit of commentary. First, she was relaying one of her ancestors' times in the wake of the Civil War. Let's listen.
The war was over. He had lost his son. He had lost the war. He didn't know how to deal with life, with no one to help operate his plantation. You know, there was 30-something people on his books, and the next year's census I go to find, and there's like 0.
I'm going to be a little bit harsh here and say that if one of your ancestors was a slave owner, I don't really give a fuck how bad he felt about losing his slaves. And say the word slaves, by the way. Stop saying workers. Stop saying people on the books. They were slaves, okay? It wasn't like being a greeter at Walmart. It wasn't just kind of a shitty job. They couldn't leave if they wanted to. A war had to be fought. 600 or so thousand people had to die to give them the right to just walk away from the plantation if they didn't want to work there anymore. And so honestly, if his profit margins fell, I don't have a lot of sympathy for the guy. Now, she does say that the changes were incredible. She says that they were good. That's good. She does occasionally say these reasonable things in the midst of all this insanity. But she goes on to talk about the orientation of the South towards prejudice and her view on what prejudice actually is now.
I feel like the South is almost less prejudiced because black folks played such an integral part in our lives. They were like our family.
I guess if you're a racist, that sounds like a reasonable thing. That sounds like some sort of compassion, but it's not, okay? What you said there is basically, we felt really close to them, like we feel to dogs, for instance. They weren't your family, okay? Yeah, maybe sometimes there was kind of a congenial atmosphere on some of these plantations, but at the end of the day, they were your property. They couldn't leave if they wanted to. Their marriages could be broken up, their kids could be shipped off, they could be beaten and possibly even killed. Don't give me the economic argument that it wouldn't make sense to kill a slave because it was lost property. Yeah, I get that. But you could kill them if you wanted to. That's kind of a bad economic situation to set up in the first place. And so don't give me this family stuff, okay? They couldn't leave if they wanted to. At the end of the day, that's slightly more important than if you said hi to them as you walked by in the morning. Now finally, possibly the most awkward part of these 2012 comments, which by the way happened at the New York Times headquarters, you'd think there would have been a little bit more press, or maybe it just went under the radar, I guess, is when she wanted to show that she wasn't racist by talking about one of her black friends. That's always a good route to take. Let's listen.
I have a young man in my life, and his name is Hollis Johnson, and he's black as that board.
Here, isn't he here? Is Hollis
Stand up,
travel with
Hollis.
you? Is Hollis here?
Come
Hi,
out
Hollis.
here, Hollis. We can't see you standing against that dark board.
That was possibly the most racist thing I've ever seen covered by the New York Times. What is it about racist people that they think it's perfectly fine to refer to the color of someone's skin as if he's as black as this background here. So obviously if I like him, I can't hate any black people, right? So talking about the difference in skin tone and saying that should influence how we see them, and look, he's blacker than a light-skinned black person and I let him stay in my house. That's not a good route to take in any case. I don't like any part of that little video you saw. So she refers twice to the color of his skin. He apparently is fine with it. I don't know the guy. I don't know his circumstance. Maybe he's doing the best he can with a harsh deck of cards he's been dealt from. I don't know. I don't like that the audience laughed at that point. That seems pretty racist. I didn't like the welcome to the South, as if saying, yeah, this seems kind of questionable, a little bit awkward, maybe a little bit racist, but we're from the South. So those are the videos I wanted to focus on from 2012. Look, Paula Deen has already been fired by the Food Network. Within a month, she is going to be gone. Now, her fans are pissed off. Look, I have a strong connection to Alton Brown. I guess if it turned out that he was racist, I would feel bad if he lost his job, maybe because he makes all those puppets and stuff. But look, this is not just a couple of N-bombs dropped or anything like that. Like, she clearly, that's how she feels about black people. Now look, I understand that she doesn't think she's racist. People in general do not think that they are bad. That's how it works. Villains don't think they're villains. They simply think that their motivations make sense in a way that we don't. So she doesn't think that she's racist, but she just has this history now of saying incredibly racist things, revealing a worldview that is 150 years out of the mainstream. Now, does that mean that she should be fired? Not necessarily. I think that horrible people should be allowed to keep their jobs. I think that it should be up to sort of the free market. If people don't want to watch Paula Deen because she's a racist, I think they're fine and free and able to make that decision. And if Food Network wants to fire her because people don't want to watch her program, which is why I assume they fired her, I think that makes a ton of sense. And those who are sticking up for her, look, I understand the connection that we feel to celebrities, but at least in this issue, she does not seem like a good person. I'm going to be real. I'm going to keep it real here. Maybe in other ways, she's a fine person. She makes tasty food. I'll grant her that. But she does appear to have a long history of racism, and it looks like she's paying the price for it. Okay, let's move on to our last two stories. They're nothing but fun. They're a little bit ridiculous. I don't really know which one I want to do first. Let's go with this one. I've been waiting to cover this all day. Game of Thrones has made its mark on America in a way that you might not have imagined it would. We've made jokes in the past about wanting to name our daughters Arya or something like this, but people have one-upped even me and Jank. So last year, 146 American girls were named Khaleesi, which is awesome. That's a 450% jump, you can do the math, in the name's usage from 2011, and before 2011 it was unknown. Not surprising since the show is only in its third season. Now yes, there had been people reading it, but apparently seeing Emilia Clarke in the role, it makes the name a bit more intriguing. Now also, by the way, the variant Khaleesi without the H, simplified a bit in spelling, there's 30 of those. So all told, almost 200 American girls. In about 18 years, we're going to see them walk in the streets with the name Khaleesi. Hopefully the show will have run its course by that point. We'll have seen everything we're going to see. But who knows? Now, obviously, people are going to react to this by saying, like, why are you nerds so obsessed with this show? But I don't know, why do we pick any name we pick? Because the name seems appealing for some reason. The idea that I might eventually name my daughter Daenerys or Arya, it's not out of the question. Khaleesi, I don't like that as much, both because in terms of the actual story, it is her title, I get that. I think Daenerys and Dany as a nickname is more attractive, I suppose, as a potential name. I personally know that there's a very high chance that my first daughter is going to be named Avienda. I don't know if you guys get that, you get a lot of internet points from me. But anyway, this is such a modern thing. No, it's not even modern. You know what? That's ridiculous. Like the idea that this is just something we do because of TV. No, people name their babies because of books that they read or Shakespearean sonnets that they read a long time ago. That's how we choose our names. And look, Game of Thrones is a great show, possibly one of the best shows of all time. I would not be surprised if there were some Tyrions and some Robs running around. That's just how American society works. And so I look forward to when someday my kids run into a couple of Khaleesi's. I think it'll be interesting. And then finally, for 25 years now, the world's ugliest dog contest has been going on, and we're finding out with the results to the 2013 edition that just like in the Arrested Development alternative beauty contests, it turns out that the winners tended to have it going on in the conventional sense. So we're going to bring up some pictures of the ugliest dogs in the country. So you're seeing them there. Now, in general, these do tend to be pretty horrific looking dogs. Their fur tends to be horrible. The mottled skin, maybe not preferable on a dog. They tend to have some scraggly teeth and things like that. This is all true. These dogs are ugly, and so the contest is living up to its name. But when you look at the winner, right here, what? The ugliest dog in the country? This is Wally, a Basset Beagle mix. That looks like a damn normal looking dog right there. And so I feel like we've been cheated, America. We were promised an ugly dog, the ugliest dog, and instead we get something that I would have no problem petting if I was walking down the street. Now, why am I covering this? Because I'm a dog lover. I have a dog, Hilo. I think that he's one of the cutest dogs in the country. I don't know if they have that contest, but if they do, maybe someday he'll be in it. But yeah, I think that this is an interesting case of, even when we're trying to enshrine the value of ugliness, cute is pretty appealing and we can't turn it down. I mean, when we talk about our favorite singers, our favorite actors and things like that, they do tend to be more attractive people. More attractive people, it's been shown in studies, get more money and they're trusted more and respected more. And so even in this case, where we are specifically, the mission statement of the organization is let's see some ugliness, they can't do it. They gotta show something cute. And yeah, I mean, look, if Wally was up for adoption, I might take him. He looks like a perfectly cute dog. The worst that they could say about him, by the way, is that he looks like a combination of the parts of various dogs. But that by itself does not make him ugly. That's a cute pooch right there. And let me just point out, by the way, that I understand some people are cat people. I get that. I like cats too. I'm personally a dog person. But there's just something so human about the human-dog relationship. There's something so natural about it. I mean, obviously there's the sort of shared evolution over the last 10,000 or 100,000 years, however long it is. But even an ugly dog, me as a person, I just feel a connection to them. And so, look, let me know if you disagree, and if Wally is actually made any of you lose your lunch, I suppose. I would be surprised to find that out. So that's all we've got for this week. I don't have time, unfortunately, to do the weekly roundup, but it will be back next week. I have compiled a couple of questions. I didn't have enough that I specifically wanted to address this time, but don't worry, it will return in the future. I'm trying to cut down the amount of time it takes to do the show to make sure that I can do it every week, because as you know, this is a Saturday thing. I come in, I do it all Saturday, so my weekend is at best one day long as it is. And so that's how it's going to be for the near future. As always, if you have stories you'd like to see covered on the show in the future, I'm one of the easiest to reach people in the world. You can go to my personal fan page someone set up on Facebook. You can go to facebook.com/TYTUniversity. You can tweet me at Iadarola. And of course, you can leave comments in any of these videos as they go up on youtube.com/John Iadarola. And I look forward to hearing from you. See you next week.